really to you to interpret, but that's partly their title. I think it was a wise choice, thinking back now. And I think the study, or I believe the study to be a reinterpretation of both Mexican and Mexican-American history. And it's one that examines, in essence, Mexico's struggle to secure its northern border with repatriates in the years after the U.S.-Mexican War, of course. So, as you know, after the Mexican-American War, there's anywhere from about 100, and it depends on who you speak to, but anywhere from 116,000 to 250,000 Mexicans that are, quote-unquote, left in the ceded territories. And so what the book looks at is Mexico's efforts to try and entice and repatriate that population of Mexicans after the Mexican-American War.
How many?
It depends on which estimates, but they're safely between 116,000 to upwards of 250,000 Mexicans that are left in what are today the states of Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and California.
And how many of them were actually repatriated?
I argue that in the 4 decades following the U.S.-Mexican-American War, and these are statistics taken from other scholars, somewhere between about 25% of that population eventually made its way back to Mexico in the 4 decades after the Mexican-American War. So,
let me translate that into Spanish.
Claro que sí.
Bueno, entonces, ahora sí ya moviéndonos al tema del libro, del cual, por cierto, va a haber una lectura pública ahora el viernes. Al ratito vamos a anunciar dónde y cuándo. Bueno, es el viernes. Le preguntaba entonces a José Ángel que nos hable un poco de su libro. Y bueno, lo primero que él me comentaba es que el título fue un poco cambiado por el editor. Y entonces ahora se llama Colonización México-Americana durante el siglo XIX, una historia de la frontera de México-Estados Unidos. Y él dice que, bueno, el libro quiere un poco reinterpretar tanto la historia de México como de los mexicoamericanos en las décadas siguientes a la guerra México-Americana, que por cierto, para quien no sabe, fue en 1847, del 47 al 50 más o menos, ¿no?
Más o menos.
Ajá. Y esta guerra ahí tan trágica todavía hasta la fecha en la conciencia de los mexicanos, porque fue donde se perdió casi, bueno, entre comillas, la mitad del territorio. Y bueno, él habla entonces que el libro trata básicamente de los esfuerzos del gobierno mexicano, del Estado mexicano, por repatriar a muchos de los que, entre comillas, fueron dejados en el territorio que pasó a ser de los Estados Unidos, ¿no? Por eso dice por allí la frase, ¿no? Que nosotros no cruzamos la frontera, ¿no? La frontera nos cruzó a nosotros.
Precisamente.
y bueno, entonces yo le preguntaba que más o menos qué cantidad de personas estamos hablando, y él decía que que más o menos de unos 160,000 a 250,000 personas, y yo luego le preguntaba qué porcentaje más o menos se logró repatriar, cualquier cosa que eso signifique, y él me decía que más o menos podríamos decir que un 25%.
En las 4 décadas después de la guerra, ¿verdad?
Ajá, o sea, digamos del 1850 a 1890.
Casi.
Okay, then now let's switch to English. So, kind of, it's what I mean. Let's just listen to you.
Sure. And as you were saying, Leo, and I think that was a perfect. I mean, you succinctly sort of noted that what I was saying, and just to follow up on that, I think that these early repatriations, or as what are they, deportations, expulsions? I mean, that's also a topic that I cover in the book about how to describe these processes. But I think that these early deportations or repatriations, I think they set a pattern in motion that continues until the close of the 19th century. And so in response to these past interpretations, I suggest that the resettlement of these particular populations centered on a few issues, and I'll name 3 of them here. I think the first is that this particular narrative was oftentimes described as a nationalist impulse, right? The few historians on both sides of the border that had written about this particular process oftentimes concluded that it was because of some nationalist ideology on the Mexican state. And what I found in my research was quite different. And I came to the conclusion that it was basically around 3 or 4 issues. The first of it is is that the Mexican state was interested in repatriating this population towards its northern frontiers because it was trying to develop the region, or if you prefer, it was trying to settle the region, which also included, by the way, the pacification of the indigenous population. That border had been populated and had been controlled by independent Indians for generations. They had refused to submit to either Mexican or U.S. hegemony. So these repatriates were seen also as a part in helping to assist the Mexican government in pacifying and settling and, of course, killing these populations.
Let me interrupt you a little
Sure.
bit. Actually, because you recommended me to read this Pancho Villa biography by Friedrich Katz.
Yes.
No, I'm remembering that
Yes,
because
yes.
kind of the first chapter of this biography is about how you can't understand what Pancho Villa and what the Villismo was if
Right.
you first don't understand these efforts of all these colonizers to, always in war with the indigenous population.
Exactly, and as it turns out, Friedrich Katz was one of my dissertation advisors. Right?
Really?
So too, I think this also was part of this thing that was referred to as to modernize the country, but only this time with loyal Mexican-American settlers. I mean, you know this being from Mexico City yourself, that there is constantly this discourse of modernizar, ¿verdad? La modernización. And, we can trace the genealogy of this back, to the 19th century. So that was part of the discourse, was that these individuals would help modernize the country, right, with the skills and ideas that they had learned in the U.S., which I kind of illustrate in the book didn't really always transpire that way. And three, I think that these repatriations also serve to block later the tides of migrants that were leading to the U.S. and as a way to prevent the depopulation of Mexico's northern frontier. And what do I mean by that? I'll give you just one example. After the gold rush of California in 1849, that particular gold rush was some of the first people that actually arrived were actually from Sonora. There was such a migration of Sonorenses to the gold rush. And by the way, they were making money.
When was that?
Between 1849, 1850, up until about the middle of about 1855 or so. I mean, almost to the close of that particular decade. And they were coming back with a lot of money. This is not my opinion. These are documents from the governor of Sonora, Ignacio Pesqueira, who noted the riches that they were coming back with. But if you think about it, when you have this population of individuals migrating north, you also depopulate the area. You leave it open for these so-called Indios Bárbaros to attack. So part and parcel of the process of repatriating these individuals, at least if we're talking just about Sonora, was a way to populate an area that was losing migrants to California and that was being left open to the whims of these indigenous Indians, which were better armed, much more militarily savvy, and quite destructive in their own efforts.
Okay, let me translate that into Spanish. Y bueno, entonces le pedí a José que siguiera platicando del libro y él me decía